The Last Train Home. Chapter 1. Missed Connections. The harsh fluorescent lights of Millbrook Station flickered ominously as James Mitchell glanced at his watch for the 100th time. 11:58 p.m. His heart sank. The last train had departed 2 minutes ago, leaving him stranded in this desolate outpost on the outskirts of the city. James cursed under his breath, the sound echoing through the empty platform. How could he have been so careless? One last drink with colleagues had turned into 3, and now here he was, alone in a station he'd never paid much attention to before. He pulled out his phone, desperately searching for a cab service or a friend who might be awake at this ungodly hour. No signal. Of course, he was truly on his own. The night air grew colder, seeping through his thin jacket and chilling him to the bone. James paced the length of the platform, his footsteps echoing off the grimy tiles. The station seemed different at night, more menacing. Shadows danced at the corners of his vision, and every creak of the ancient building sent shivers down his spine. As midnight approached, an eerie stillness descended upon Millbrook Station. The distant hum of the city faded away, leaving only the sound of James's ragged breathing and the occasional rustle of litter skittering across the platform. And then he heard it, a whisper, so faint he almost convinced himself it was just the wind. But there it was again, clearer this time, a lilting voice speaking words he couldn't quite make out. James spun around, searching for the source, but he was alone. Wasn't he? The whispers multiplied, a cacophony of ethereal voices rising and falling like a spectral tide. James's heart raced, pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He backed away, pressing himself against the cold tile wall, eyes darting frantically from shadow to shadow. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing from the darkened tunnel at the end of the platform. James held his breath, willing whatever it was to go away, but the footsteps grew louder, more numerous. It sounded like a crowd approaching, their gait unnaturally in sync. A train whistle pierced the night, startling James so badly he nearly fell. He looked up at the arrivals board, which had been blank moments ago. Now it displayed a single entry. Last train, arriving now. Relief washed over him. He wasn't stranded after all. As the train's headlights illuminated the tunnel, James stepped forward, ready to board and put this nightmarish experience behind him. But as the train slowed to a stop, James's relief turned to horror. The carriages were packed with passengers, but they were like no passengers he'd ever seen. Translucent figures in outdated clothes pressed against the windows, their faces a mixture of sorrow and malevolence. Ghostly hands reached out, beckoning him to join them. James stumbled backward, a scream caught in his throat. The doors hissed open, and a wave of cold, stale air washed over him. The ghostly conductor's voice rang out, clear as a bell, all aboard the last train home. Final stop, eternity. As the spectral passengers began to disembark, their hollow eyes fixed on James, he realized with growing terror that his journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Chapter 2. Phantom Passengers. James's legs trembled as he backed away from the ghostly train, his mind reeling from the impossible scene before him. The spectral passengers continued to disembark, their translucent forms flickering under the station's harsh, fluorescent lights. Each step they took seemed to drain the warmth from the air, leaving behind a bone-chilling cold that seeped into James's very core. Among the crowd, James spotted figures from different eras. A woman in a Victorian dress, her face partially obscured by a lace veil, a dapper gentleman in a 1920s suit, a phantom cigarette eternally smoldering between his fingers, a young soldier in a World War II uniform, his eyes haunted by battles long past. They moved with an eerie grace, their feet barely touching the ground. As the phantoms spread across the platform, James found himself cornered against the station wall. His breath came in short, panicked gasps, visible in the frigid air. He squeezed his eyes shut, praying that when he opened them, this nightmare would dissolve into nothing more than a stress-induced hallucination. But when he dared to look again, the ghosts were still there, closer now. A wizened old man in tattered 19th century workman's clothes stood directly in front of James, his milky eyes staring right through him. When the specter spoke, his voice was like gravel scraping against rusted metal. "You missed your train, lad," the ghost wheezed, a mirthless grin spreading across his gaunt face. "But don't you worry, we've got room for one more." James's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His mind raced, searching for a logical explanation, an escape route, anything to make sense of this madness. But there was no denying the supernatural presence that now filled Millbrook Station. A cold, ethereal hand gripped James's arm, and he let out a strangled cry. The Victorian woman had sidled up next to him, her touch sending icy tendrils of fear through his body. "Come now, dear," she cooed, her voice a ghostly whisper. "It's time to board. We've all been waiting for you." With a surge of adrenaline, James wrenched his arm free and bolted. He ran blindly, pushing through the crowd of specters. Their forms parted like mist around him, but he could feel their icy touches grazing his skin as he passed. The platform seemed to stretch endlessly before him, the exit always just out of reach. Behind him, the ghostly conductor's voice boomed, echoing unnaturally in the station. "Last call for the eternal journey. All passengers must board." James's lungs burned as he ran, his eyes wild with fear. He chanced a glance over his shoulder and immediately wished he hadn't. The entire horde of phantoms was gliding after him, their faces a mixture of hunger and anticipation. The train doors stood open, a gaping maw of darkness ready to swallow him whole. Just as James felt spectral fingers closing in on him once more, he spotted a door he'd never noticed before. It was tucked away in a shadowy corner of the station, its paint peeling and its hinges rusted. Without a second thought, he veered towards it, praying it wasn't locked. The door handle turned with a groan, and James flung himself through the opening. He slammed the door shut behind him, pressing his back against it as he gasped for air. The sounds of the ghostly crowd faded, replaced by an eerie silence. As James's eyes adjusted to the darkness, he realized he was at the top of a narrow staircase. Faint light flickered from below, accompanied by the distant sound of machinery. The air was thick with the scent of oil and rust. James knew he couldn't go back to the platform. Whatever lay at the bottom of these stairs had to be better than the horror he'd just escaped. With shaking legs, he began his descent into the unknown depths of Millbrook Station, unaware that he was stepping from one nightmare into another. Chapter 3: The Underworld. James descended the narrow staircase, his hand trailing along the damp wall for support. The flickering light grew stronger with each step, casting dancing shadows that seemed to reach out for him. The mechanical sounds intensified, a cacophony of grinding gears and hissing steam that echoed through the underground chamber. As he reached the bottom, James found himself in a vast, cavernous space. The ceiling arched high above, lost in shadows, while before him stretched a labyrinth of rusted machinery, ancient conveyor belts, and towering boilers. It was as if he had stepped into the beating heart of some long-forgotten industrial beast. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning coal and hot metal. Sparks rained down from unseen heights, sizzling as they hit puddles of oily water on the floor. James squinted through the haze, trying to make sense of his surroundings. "Hello?" he called out, his voice barely audible above the mechanical din. "Is anyone here?" A sharp clang echoed through the chamber, causing James to jump. He spun around, heart racing, but saw nothing but more machinery. As he turned back, he froze. Standing before him was a figure, materializing as if from the very steam that filled the air. It was a man, or what was left of one. His skin was blackened and cracked like coal, with veins of molten fire pulsing beneath. Where his eyes should have been, there were only smoldering embers. When he spoke, his voice was like metal scraping against stone. "Welcome to the underworld, James," the figure rasped. "We've been expecting you." James stumbled backward, his mind reeling. How do you know my name? What is this place?" The coal man's mouth twisted into what might have been a smile. "This is where the forgotten ones dwell, those who built the railways, who died in its service, who were left behind by progress. We are the fuel that keeps the trains running, even now." As if on cue, a distant whistle echoed through the chamber, followed by the rhythmic chug of a phantom train. James felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. "But I'm not. I'm still alive," James protested weakly. The coal man tilted his head, embers falling from his eye sockets. "Are you certain? Think back, James. How did you come to be at Millbrook Station tonight?" James opened his mouth to answer, but found his mind blank. He couldn't remember how he'd gotten to the station or even why he had been there. Panic began to set in as he realized he couldn't recall anything before the moment he found himself alone on that deserted platform. I don't know, he whispered, his voice trembling. The coal man nodded solemnly. The last train home isn't just a train, James. It's a journey, a crossing over. And you, like so many before you, missed your stop. James felt his knees weaken, and he sagged against a nearby machine. The implications of the coal man's words were too horrifying to contemplate. No, he muttered, shaking his head. No, this can't be real. I'm not dead. I can't be. The coal man approached, leaving smoldering footprints in his wake. Denial is a natural part of the process, but you have a choice to make now, James. You can join us here in the underworld, keeping the trains running for eternity, or you can try to find your way back to the world above. But I warn you, the path is treacherous, and few have ever succeeded. James looked up, meeting the coal man's fiery gaze. There's a way back? The figure nodded slowly. There is always a way. But the price is high and the journey perilous. You must navigate the labyrinth of the forgotten, face the guardians of the threshold, and find the one thing that anchors you to the world of the living, all before the final train departs. James stood up straighter, a flicker of determination cutting through his fear. I'll do it. I have to try. The coal man's ember eyes flared brighter. Very well. Your trial begins now. But remember, James, time moves differently here. Every moment you linger brings you closer to becoming one of us forever. With a gesture, the coal man caused the machinery around them to spring to life. Conveyor belts began to move, carrying shadowy shapes into the darkness. Steam hissed from vents and was obscuring James's vision. Follow the tracks, the coal man's voice echoed as he faded into the mist. They will lead you to the first guardian, but beware, for not all paths lead to salvation. As the figure disappeared, James found himself alone in the clanking, hissing heart of the underworld. Before him stretched a maze of tracks, disappearing into the gloom. With a deep breath, he took his first step, the weight of his quest heavy upon his shoulders. The race against time had begun, and somewhere in the distance a train whistle sounded, a reminder of the fate that awaited him should he fail. Chapter 4. The Labyrinth of Memories. James trudged along the rusted tracks, the oppressive heat of the underworld pressing down on him. The air was thick with steam and the acrid smell of burning coal. As he ventured deeper into the maze, the mechanical sounds began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the occasional distant whistle of a phantom train. The tracks before him split and diverged, creating a bewildering network of paths. James hesitated at each junction, his heart pounding as he tried to decide which way to go. The coal man's warning echoed in his mind. Not all paths led to salvation. As he rounded a corner, James stumbled to a halt. Before him stood a colossal wall of gears and cogs, slowly turning with a grinding noise that set his teeth on edge. At its center was an ornate door, guarded by a figure that made James's blood run cold. It was a woman, or what remained of one. Her body was a patchwork of flesh and metal, steam hissing from joints where skin met steel. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly blue light, fixed unblinkingly on James. Who goes there? Her voice was a discordant mixture of human speech and mechanical whirring. James swallowed hard. I'm James. I'm trying to find my way back to the world of the living. The woman machine tilted her head, gears clicking in her neck. I am the guardian of memories. To pass through this door, you must prove you still belong to the world above. Show me a memory, James. Show me something that anchors you to life. Panic gripped James as he realized he still couldn't remember anything before the station. He closed his eyes, concentrating hard, searching the blank spaces of his mind for any glimmer of his past life. Suddenly, a flash of color burst behind his eyelids. He saw a little girl with pigtails, laughing as she ran through a sprinkler on a sunny day. The image was gone as quickly as it came, but it left James gasping. I saw a child, he stammered. A little girl. I don't know who she is, but it felt important. The guardian's eyes flared brighter. A fragment of a memory. It may be enough, but to truly pass, you must reclaim it fully. Step forward, James, and face your past. As James approached, the guardian reached out with a metal hand. The moment her cold fingers touched his forehead, the world around him dissolved. He found himself standing in a sun-drenched backyard. The little girl from his fleeting memory was there, but now he could see her clearly. She had his eyes, his nose. With a jolt, he realized she was his daughter. "Daddy!" she squealed, running towards him with arms outstretched. James knelt down, his heart swelling with a love so intense it was almost painful. As his arms closed around her, the memory began to fade, and he found himself back in the underworld, tears streaming down his face. The guardian nodded solemnly. "You have passed the first test, James. Your connection to the living world is strong but fragile. Reclaim your memories, and you may yet find your way home." With a grinding of gears, the door behind her swung open, revealing a swirling vortex of mist and shadow. "Be warned," the guardian said as James stepped towards the doorway. "The path ahead is treacherous. The underworld will try to claim you, to make you forget why you fight to return. Stay strong and remember what anchors you to life." James nodded, his daughter's laughter still echoing in his ears. As he stepped through the door, he felt a renewed determination. He had something to fight for now, a reason to resist the lure of the underworld. The mist enveloped him, and James found himself in a new part of the labyrinth. The walls here were made of shifting shadows, and in the distance he could hear the mournful wail of lost souls. A chill ran down his spine as he realized the true nature of his quest. This wasn't just a journey through a physical maze, but a battle against forgetting, against the very essence of death itself. As he pressed on, James clutched the memory of his daughter close to his heart. It was a beacon in the darkness, a lifeline to the world he desperately needed to return to. But with each step, he could feel the weight of the underworld pressing in, trying to erase the fragile recollections he had reclaimed. In the distance, a train whistle sounded, closer now than before. Time was running out. James quickened his pace, plunging deeper into the labyrinth of memories, knowing that somewhere in this maze of forgotten moments lay the key to his salvation, and the way back to the little girl waiting for her daddy to come home. Chapter 5: The Hall of Echoes. James pushed forward through the swirling mists, the memory of his daughter a warm ember in his heart. The shadowy walls of the labyrinth gradually gave way to smooth, reflective surfaces. He found himself in a vast, circular chamber, its walls and floor made entirely of mirrors. This was the Hall of Echoes. As he stepped into the chamber, James gasped. His reflections stared back at him from every angle, but they weren't all the same. Some showed him as he was now, disheveled and confused. Others depicted him in various stages of his life, a child, a teenager, a young man, and some showed him as something else entirely. A disembodied voice, neither male nor female, resonated through the chamber. "Welcome, James, to the Hall of Echoes. Here, all possible versions of yourself coexist. Some are memories, some are paths not taken, and some are yet to be." James spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. "Who are you? What is this place?" "I am the Keeper of Possibilities," the voice replied, "and this hall is a crossroads of sorts. To proceed, you must choose a path, but choose wisely, for not all reflections lead to salvation." James approached one of the mirrors. In it, he saw himself as a successful businessman, briefcase in hand, hurrying through a busy street. The image stirred something in his memory, a life of ambition and stress, of missed family dinners and broken promises. He moved to another. This reflection showed him as an old man, surrounded by grandchildren, his face wrinkled, but happy. It was a future he had often dreamed of, but now seemed impossibly far away. A third mirror caught his eye. In it, he saw himself as he was now, but with a haunted, otherworldly look in his eyes. This James was clearly a permanent resident of the underworld, having given up on his quest to return to the living. "You must choose, James," the keeper's voice urged. "But remember, the reflection you pick will shape your journey forward. It may bring you closer to home or lead you further into the depths of the underworld." James closed his eyes, focusing on the memory of his daughter. When he opened them, he noticed a mirror he hadn't seen before. In it, he saw himself as he was just before boarding that fateful last train, tired from work, but with a small gift bag in his hand and a look of anticipation on his face. With a jolt, another memory surfaced. It was his daughter's birthday. He had promised to be home early for once, to celebrate with her. That's why he had been so desperate to catch the last train. Without hesitation, James stepped toward this reflection. As his fingers touched the cool surface of the mirror, it rippled like water. He felt himself being pulled forward through the glass and into another reality. When the world stopped spinning, James found himself in a long, dark tunnel. The walls were lined with countless doors, each one unique, some ornate, others simple, some made of wood, others of metal or stranger materials. The keeper's voice echoed one last time. You have chosen the path of redemption, James. Each door in this tunnel represents a moment in your life. Some lead to memories you must reclaim, others to challenges you must overcome. Find the right doors and you will find your way home. James took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The tunnel stretched endlessly before him, filled with the soft creaking of countless doors. He knew that somewhere among them was the key to his return, the path back to his daughter and the life he had left behind. As he started down the tunnel, James noticed something that made his heart race. At the far end, barely visible in the gloom, was a faint, pulsing light. It looked like a train's headlamp. The last train home was coming. But would James be ready to board it when it arrived? With renewed determination, he approached the first door. It was a simple wooden door, painted a cheerful yellow. Something about it tugged at his memory. James reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and turned the knob. As the door swung open, light flooded out, momentarily blinding him. When his vision cleared, James found himself standing in a hospital room. The sound of a baby's cry filled the air, and he saw himself, younger, hair a little less gray, holding a tiny bundle. Tears welled up in James's eyes as he watched the scene unfold. This was the day his daughter was born. He saw the look of wonder and love on his younger self's face as he cradled his newborn child. The memory washed over him, filling in the blank spaces in his mind. He remembered the overwhelming joy and the promises he made to always be there for her. As the scene began to fade, James felt a piece of himself click back into place. He was back in the tunnel, but now there was a warm glow in his chest. The missing piece of his past had strengthened his resolve. James knew he had to keep going, to open more doors and reclaim more of himself. In the distance, the light of the approaching train grew slightly brighter. Time was passing, but James felt more confident now. He moved on to the next door, ready to face whatever memory or challenge awaited him. As he reached for the handle, James silently renewed his vow. He would make it back to his daughter. He would board that last train home, no matter what the underworld threw in his path. The journey ahead would be difficult, but with each reclaimed memory and each overcome challenge, he was one step closer to life, to home, to love. Chapter 6: Echoes of the Past. James stood in the tunnel, his hand hovering over the knob of the next door. This one was made of weathered oak, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them. Taking a deep breath, he turned the handle and stepped through. The world around him dissolved into a whirl of colors before settling into a familiar scene. James found himself standing in the living room of his old apartment. The sound of laughter drew his attention to a young girl sitting on the floor, surrounded by colorful building blocks. "Daddy, look!" the girl exclaimed, holding up a wobbly tower. "I made a castle!" James's heart clenched as he recognized his daughter, Emma, at 5 years old. He watched as his past self entered the room, briefcase in hand, looking tired but smiling. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," past James said, crouching down beside her. "Is it for the princess?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, and for the dragon, too. They're friends in this story." As James observed the scene, he felt a mixture of joy and regret wash over him. He remembered this day. It was one of the rare evenings he had managed to come home early from work. The memory of Emma's delighted face when he had suggested they order pizza and have a movie night was crystal clear. But as the scene continued to play out, James noticed something he hadn't before. While his past self was engaged with Emma, his phone kept buzzing. He saw himself glance at it repeatedly, a frown creasing his brow. "James," a voice called from behind him, startling him. He turned to see a shimmering figure, the keeper of possibilities. "This memory holds a lesson. Watch carefully." James turned back to the scene. His past self was now standing, phone in hand, an apologetic look on his face. "I'm sorry, Emma," past James was saying. "Daddy has to go back to work for a little while. We'll have our movie night when I get back, okay?" The disappointment on Emma's face was heart-wrenching. James watched as his past self hurried out the door, leaving Emma alone with her blocks. I don't remember this part," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We often choose to forget our mistakes," the keeper said softly. but acknowledging them is the first step toward change. As the scene began to fade, James felt a profound sense of regret. He had let work take precedence over his daughter far too often. The memory of Emma's disappointed face burned itself into his mind, becoming a powerful reminder of what truly mattered. James found himself back in the tunnel, the door closing behind him with a soft click. The experience left him shaken, but also more determined than ever to make things right. "I won't make the same mistakes again," he vowed, his voice echoing in the empty corridor. The keeper's voice resonated around him. "Remember this feeling, James. It will guide you in the challenges to come." With renewed purpose, James moved on to the next door. This one was made of sleek metal, its surface reflecting the dim light of the tunnel. As he reached for the handle, he noticed that it was unusually warm to the touch. Stepping through, James found himself in a place he didn't recognize. It was a stark, modernistic office space, all glass and chrome. He saw himself, a few years older than his current age, sitting behind a massive desk. "What is this?" James asked, confused. "I don't remember this." "This is not a memory," the keeper's voice explained. "This is a possible future, one path your life could take." James watched as his future self worked tirelessly, barely looking up from his computer. The office grew dark, but future James didn't notice. On his desk, James spotted a framed photo of Emma, now a young woman. It was pushed to the side, almost hidden behind stacks of papers. A chill ran down James's spine as he realized what he was seeing, a future where he had chosen career over family, where he had failed to learn from his mistakes. "No," James said firmly, "this isn't the future I want." As if in response to his words, the scene began to waver and dissolve. James found himself back in the tunnel, his heart racing. "You have seen two paths," the keeper said. "One past, one possible future. What have you learned?" James took a moment to collect his thoughts. "I've learned that time with loved ones is precious and irreplaceable. That success means nothing if you lose sight of what truly matters." "A valuable lesson," the keeper agreed. "Carry it with you as you continue your journey." As the keeper's voice faded, James noticed that the light at the end of the tunnel, the approaching train, had grown brighter. He was making progress, but he knew there were more challenges ahead. With each door, each memory, and possible future, James felt pieces of himself coming back together. He was rediscovering who he was, who he wanted to be, and what truly mattered in his life. The next door loomed before him, this one made of rough-hewn wood with iron bands. James didn't know what lay beyond it, but he was ready to face whatever came next. With Emma's face clear in his mind and the lessons of the past and future guiding him, he reached for the handle. As he opened the door, a gust of wind rushed past him, carrying with it the faint sound of a train whistle. The last train home was getting closer. James stepped through the doorway, ready for the next stage of his journey back to the world of the living, back to his daughter, and back to the life he now knew he wanted to live. Chapter 7. The Crossroads. James stepped through the rough-hewn wooden door, the iron bands cool against his palm. As he crossed the threshold, the dim tunnel gave way to a vast open space. He found himself standing at the center of an enormous circular platform, suspended in what seemed to be an endless void. The platform was divided into 4 distinct sections, each leading to a different path stretching out into the darkness. The Keeper of Possibilities materialized beside him, their form shimmering like starlight. "Welcome, James, to the crossroads of destiny. Here, you must make a choice that will determine your path forward." James looked around, taking in the surreal scene before him. Each path seemed to pulse with a different energy, calling to him in its unique way. "What are these paths?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Each represents a different aspect of your life," the Keeper explained. "The path of ambition, the path of love, the path of wisdom, and the path of redemption. You must choose one to follow, but be warned. Each choice comes with its own challenges and rewards." James approached the first path, which glowed with a fierce golden light. As he neared it, he felt a surge of energy, a burning desire to achieve and succeed. "This is the path of ambition," the Keeper said. "It will lead you to great success in your career, but it may come at a cost to your personal relationships." Moving to the second path, James felt warmth envelop him. This path shimmered with a soft pink light, and he could almost hear Emma's laughter echoing from its depths. "The path of love," the keeper intoned. "It will strengthen your bond with Emma and lead you to deep, fulfilling relationships. However, you may have to sacrifice some of your professional goals." The third path emitted a cool blue glow. As James stood before it, he felt a sense of calm and clarity wash over him. "This is the path of wisdom," said the keeper. "It will grant you deep understanding and inner peace, but may require you to let go of material pursuits." Finally, James turned to the fourth path. It pulsed with a deep purple light, and standing near it filled him with a mix of regret and hope. "The path of redemption," the keeper explained. "It offers you the chance to right past wrongs and forge a new future, but it will require facing your deepest fears and failures." James stood at the center of the platform, his mind reeling with the weight of the decision before him. Each path called to him in its way, representing different aspects of the life he could lead. "Remember," the keeper said softly, "there is no right or wrong choice. Each path will lead you back to the world of the living, but the journey and the person you become will be shaped by your decision here." James closed his eyes, thinking back on everything he had experienced since missing that fateful train. He thought of Emma, of his career, and of the regrets and hopes that had brought him to this point. When he opened his eyes, a new determination shone in them. "I choose," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word, "the path of." Just as James was about to announce his decision, a great rumbling shook the platform. The paths began to flicker and waver, and the void around them seemed to close in. "What's happening?" James shouted over the growing noise. The keeper's form began to fade. "Your time grows short, James. The last train home approaches. You must choose now or risk being lost between worlds forever." The rumbling intensified, and James could hear the distant sound of a train whistle. The paths before him started to blend together, their distinct colors merging into a swirling vortex of light. With his heart pounding and the world seeming to collapse around him, James made his choice. He stepped forward, committing himself to the path he believed would lead him to the future he truly desired. As his foot touched the chosen path, a blinding light engulfed him. The rumbling reached a crescendo, and James felt himself being pulled forward at incredible speed. The last train home had arrived, and it was carrying him back to the world of the living. In those final moments before consciousness fully returned, James saw flashes of the life that awaited him, challenges to be faced, joys to be experienced, and a future shaped by the lessons he had learned on this extraordinary journey. The last thing he heard before the vision faded was the keeper's voice, barely audible over the roar of the train. "Remember, James, the choice you made here was just the beginning. Every day you will face new crossroads. Choose wisely and never forget the power of your decisions." And then, with a final burst of light and sound, James found himself. Chapter 8, Awakening. James's eyes fluttered open, his vision blurry and unfocused. The harsh fluorescent lights above him made him squint, and for a moment he couldn't remember where he was. As his senses slowly returned, he became aware of a steady beeping sound and the antiseptic smell that could only mean one thing. He was in a hospital. He tried to sit up, but a gentle hand on his shoulder kept him in place. "Easy there, Mr. Harper," a soft voice said. "You've been through quite an ordeal." James turned his head to see a nurse standing beside his bed, checking his vitals. What happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. The nurse gave him a reassuring smile. "You were found unconscious at Millbrook Station 3 days ago. You've been in and out of consciousness since then. The doctors think you might have had some kind of seizure, but they're still running tests." 3 days. James's mind reeled at the information. Had it all been a dream? The ghostly train, the keeper of possibilities, the choices he had made, it had all felt so real. Yet here he was, back in the world of the living, as if he had never left. "There's someone here who's been waiting to see you," the nurse said, interrupting his thoughts. She stepped aside, revealing Emma standing in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed from crying but filled with relief. "James!" Emma rushed to his side, taking his hand in hers. "Oh, thank God you're awake. I've been so worried." As James looked into Emma's eyes, a flood of emotions washed over him. He remembered the path he had chosen at the crossroads of destiny, the decision he had made in that moment between worlds. Though the details were hazy, The feeling of certainty remained. "Emma," he said, his voice growing stronger, "I'm so sorry I've been such a fool." Emma shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "No, James, don't apologize. I'm just glad you're okay." James squeezed her hand. "No, I need to say this. I've been so caught up in my work, in my ambitions, that I forgot what really matters. I almost lost you, and it took this to make me realize how much you mean to me." As he spoke, fragments of his journey flashed through his mind. The ghostly passengers on the train, each with their own regrets and unfinished business. The keeper's words about the power of choices, the paths that had stretched out before him at the crossroads. "I don't know exactly what happened to me," James continued, "but I know that I've been given a second chance, and I don't want to waste it." Emma leaned in, pressing her forehead against his. "What are you saying, James?" "I'm saying that I choose us, Emma. I choose love. I want to make things right between us. I want to be the partner you deserve." As the words left his mouth, James felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew, with a certainty that defied explanation, that he had made the right choice. The path of love might not be the easiest, but it was the one that felt truest to his heart. Emma's eyes shimmered with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you, James. We'll figure this out together." Just then, there was a knock at the door. James looked up to see his boss, Mr. Carlson, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "James, good to see you awake. How are you feeling?" James took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he knew he had to do. "Mr. Carlson, I'm glad you're here. There's something I need to discuss with you about my position at the firm." As James began to speak, he felt a strange sense of déjà vu, as if he had lived this moment before. But this time he knew he was on the right path. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with Emma by his side. Outside the hospital window, a train whistle sounded in the distance. James glanced out, half expecting to see the ghostly train from his journey. Instead, he saw only the bustling city going about its daily business. But for a moment, just a moment, he thought he caught a glimpse of a figure, tall, otherworldly, and vaguely familiar, standing on the platform of a distant station. The figure raised a hand as if in farewell and then vanished. James blinked and the vision was gone. But the lesson remained. Every day was a new crossroads, a new chance to choose the path that led to happiness and fulfillment. And James was determined to make the most of each and every one. Chapter 9: Reflections and New Beginnings. The weeks following James's hospital stay were a whirlwind of change and introspection. As he sat in his apartment, staring out at the city skyline, he marveled at how much his life had transformed in such a short time. His conversation with Mr. Carlson at the hospital had gone better than he could have hoped. Instead of quitting outright, James had negotiated a reduced workload and more flexible hours. It wasn't the career-defining move he once thought he wanted, but it felt right. It provided the balance he now knew he needed. Emma had been by his side through it all, her unwavering support a constant reminder of why he had chosen this path. Their relationship, once strained to the breaking point, was now stronger than ever. They spent their evenings talking, really talking, about their hopes, fears, and dreams for the future. But even as James embraced his new life, he couldn't shake the lingering effects of his supernatural journey. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could still hear the ghostly whispers of the train passengers, their stories of regret and missed opportunities echoing in his mind. One evening, as James and Emma walked hand in hand through Millbrook Park, they passed by the old train station. A chill ran down James's spine, and for a moment he thought he saw a familiar figure standing on the platform, the keeper of possibilities, watching him with those knowing, timeless eyes. James blinked, and the figure was gone. But the memory remained, a reminder of the choice he had made and the path he had chosen. "James?" Emma's voice brought him back to the present. "Are you okay? You looked like you saw a ghost." James smiled, squeezing her hand. "I'm fine, just remembering something." Emma looked at him curiously. "You know, you never did tell me exactly what happened that night at the station. Was it really just a seizure?" James hesitated. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? How could he describe the journey between worlds, the ghostly train, the choices that had shaped his very reality? "It's hard to explain," he said finally. "I had an experience. It made me realize what was truly important in my life." Emma nodded, not pushing for more details. Well, whatever it was, I'm grateful for it. It brought you back to me. As they continued their walk, James felt a sense of peace wash over him. The ghostly world of the last train home had changed him, opened his eyes to possibilities he had never considered before. But it was here, in the world of the living, that he was truly making those possibilities a reality. That night, as James drifted off to sleep, he found himself once again on the platform of Millbrook Station. But this time, there was no fear, no uncertainty. The keeper of possibilities stood before him, a small smile gracing their ageless face. You have chosen well, James Harper, the keeper said. But remember, every day brings new crossroads, new choices. The journey never truly ends. James nodded, understanding. I'm ready, he said. Whatever comes next, I'm ready. The keeper's smile widened. Then it is time for you to board a new train. Your own train, James Harper. Where it goes, only you can decide. As the keeper spoke, a gleaming train pulled into the station. Its doors opened, revealing not the ghosts of the past, but the bright, shining potential of the future. James stepped forward, ready to board. But before he did, he turned back to the keeper. Thank you, he said simply. The keeper nodded. Remember, James, like the choices we make echo through eternity. Choose wisely, choose with love, and your train will always find its way home. With those words ringing in his ears, James boarded the train. As it pulled away from the station, he caught one last glimpse of the keeper, raising a hand in farewell. James awoke with a start, the dream still vivid in his mind. Beside him, Emma stirred, her hand finding his in the darkness. Everything okay? She murmured sleepily. James smiled, pulling her close. Everything's perfect, he whispered, and he meant it. Outside, in the pre-dawn quiet, a train whistle sounded in the distance. But this time, James didn't feel a sense of dread or missed opportunities. Instead, he felt hope, excitement for the journey ahead. He had missed the last train home once, but now he understood that every moment was a chance to board a new train, to choose a new destination. And with Emma by his side, he was ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. As the first rays of sunlight began to peek through the curtains, James closed his eyes, content in the knowledge that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The last train home had brought him here, but it was up to him to decide where he went next. And he couldn't wait to see where the tracks would lead. Chapter 10, Epilogue, 5 years later. Millbrook Station stood silent in the golden light of the setting sun, its weathered bricks and iron railings a testament to the passage of time. James Harper, now 5 years older and wiser, stood on the platform, his hand intertwined with Emma's as they waited for the 7:15 train. So much had changed since that fateful night when James had missed the last train home. The station itself had undergone a renovation, breathing new life into the old structure while preserving its historical charm. But the changes in James's life were far more profound. He gazed at Emma, her belly swollen with their first child. The glint of their wedding bands caught the fading sunlight, a reminder of the vows they had exchanged 2 years ago on a beach at sunset. James smiled, remembering how he had once feared commitment, and how he had almost let his workaholism destroy the best thing in his life. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked, catching his contemplative look. James squeezed her hand gently. "Just how different things could have been if I hadn't missed that train all those years ago." Emma nodded, understanding in her eyes. She had heard bits and pieces of James's supernatural experience over the years, never quite sure what to make of it, but always supportive. "Do you ever regret it? Missing the train, I mean?" James shook his head without hesitation. "Not for a second. It was the best mistake I ever made." As if on cue, a distant whistle announced the approach of their train. This time, James felt a familiar chill run down his spine, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation, excitement for the journey ahead. He had left his high-pressure job at the firm, starting his own small practice that allowed him to balance work and life. It wasn't always easy, but it was fulfilling in a way his previous career had never been. He had time for Emma, for his friends, for himself, and soon he would have time for their child. As the train pulled into the station, James caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window. For a moment, he thought he saw the keeper of possibilities standing behind him, that enigmatic smile on their ageless face. But when he blinked, the image was gone, replaced by his own reflection, older, happier, at peace. "Shall we?" Emma said, tugging gently at his hand as the train doors opened. James nodded, helping her aboard. As they settled into their seats, he marveled at the journey that had brought him here. The ghostly passengers of the last train home had shown him the consequences of choices not made and opportunities missed. But they had also given him a second chance, a chance to rewrite his story. The train began to move, picking up speed as it left Millbrook Station behind. James watched the familiar landscape roll by, transformed by the golden hour into something magical and new. He realized that every day was a new chance to board a different train, to make different choices. The last train home wasn't an ending, it was just the beginning. James, Emma said softly, placing his hand on her belly. The baby's kicking. As James felt the gentle movement beneath his palm, a sense of wonder washed over him. This was his real journey, his true destination. Not a corner office or a big paycheck, but this moment, this life he was building with Emma. The train sped on into the twilight, carrying James and Emma toward their future. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, perhaps on a platform between worlds, the Keeper of Possibilities smiled, knowing that James Harper had finally found his way home. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, James knew that wherever life's train took him next, he was ready for the ride. After all, every journey begins with a single step, or in his case, a missed train, and a ghostly adventure that changed everything. The last train home had taught him that it's never too late to change tracks, to choose a different destination. And as he held Emma close, feeling the promise of new life beneath his hand, James knew he had finally arrived exactly where he was meant to be. The train whistle sounded in the distance, a haunting yet hopeful melody that echoed the story of his journey. It was a reminder that while some trains might be missed, there's always another one coming. And sometimes the most important journey is the one that takes you back to yourself. As the train carried them home, James closed his eyes, at peace with his past and excited for his future. The last train home had been just the beginning. Now, with Emma by his side and a new life on the way, he was ready for whatever adventures lay ahead on life's winding tracks. And somewhere in the night, the whistle of the last train home echoed once more, a ghostly reminder of the choice that had changed everything and the journey that would never truly end.